Hey guys, it's Kiera, and we're gonna finish off this style guide. So far, just to recap, I just cleaned up some artboard, but everything else is fine. All we did is just kind of reorganize it, but aside from that, we created the basic introduction to the Ski World logo in this case. We created the avatars, we created the protected space, and we introduced slight variations in the logo. But in this case, we kind of introduced a new color, but we didn't explain where this color came from. Is it part of the Ski World brand? Is it just a random color? So we're going to define it in the color scheme section. And there's multiple ways you can approach this again. I'm going to approach this as small little Pantone stickers almost and have the information below them. The way you can do it is just by having small little circles and just having the information below that depending on how many colors your brand uses. You can get all the information from Cooler, like we talked about before, or Pantone. If you just have a Pantone color, just include those. If you're developing a lot of web UI, you might also want to include secondary palettes and even primary palettes. So, for example, let's say that you created a logo and you're going to say that for all these logos, if it includes any buttons, that button is going to be the shade of pink. But if that button is pressed, it's going to turn into a darker shade of pink. So you're going to include that into the style guide. So again, it really matters where you're going to be placing this logo and how it's going to be used. In my case, I'm just going to make something very general. And even in the other style guides that you can download on LogoCore, I just had vertical bars go across and just show the 4 different colors. But in this case, we have a bit more colors to play around with, just because we have this gradient over here. It's going from dark orange to a lighter orange. So we should also include that into the logo. And then we also have the dark blacks and grays to play around with. We're going to be doing that right now. So I'm just going to grab a square. We're going to define it somewhere around here. We're going to do the exact same thing as last time, where we're just kind of planning it out using squares. It's kind of a non-destructive method. So we've got 4 squares. That's a company name. Let's just even these out. And let's say that we position it over here. And then this square will get slightly more spacing, just because that one will be really just specific for the blacks and grays. So again, we're going to go and hope we get lucky by pressing the right button to align. Just because I'm kind of sitting far away from the monitor and I don't see what I'm pressing. Alright, let's bring this in. And let's just start playing around with here. So beforehand, I did go to Cooler and I got some basic ideas of what I wanted to create. So for this one, let's just give it again that skylight blue. So I'm going to sample it from here. And that's going to be perfect. I may even want to take all 4 of these. I can't even give it a lighter version. I don't really want that blue to pop out. I think it's going to add some nice contrast. And yeah, I think we're going to keep it for now. We can always go back and change it. We can always go to the actual select, same fill color, and just select all the colors that use this specific color. So we're going to have that. Then the next, we're going to have the actual orange, right? From this logo over here. So we're going to do that as well. So I'm going to grab a copy of this logo. Just so it's not a symbol, but something I can edit up. We're going to play around with this. So we have this yellow over here. It's going to bring up this gradient. So I'm going to go to Window, Gradient. And we have these colors. So we're going to copy up the first one and put it into here. And we're going to do the exact same thing for the next color. Copy it in. And paste in that bright yellow. But I actually want to also include a reddish tone, just because the color in the background is actually the same, just flipped, I believe. We can actually just make sure that I'm talking the right. So again, Window, Gradient, wherever it may be, Gradient. Yes, we're using the exact same orange, but we're introducing a darker version. So we're going to click on this again, grab that hex code, and put it over here. And I'm just going to move everything down in a second. So now we have it going from darker to lighter, and we actually have a very nice color palette. And then this color can actually be defined by the actual color that we use in our logo. That's done. So we have our 4 colors, and now we actually have to write our information about them. And it sometimes takes a bit of a process, just, writing all these numbers down. But it is important for any designer just to have a quick reference on what color is used, because even in my day job, having that number is extremely useful, because I don't have to go to a previous Photoshop file and, try to estimate the right kind of blue that we use. Here I can just open up the style guide, grab the hex code or the Pantone or whatever I need, and just go from there. So, because I kind of wanted to add a background over here to write the information below, I'm not liking that we don't have a lot of space. So I'm going to take everything and shrink it down. And I think this will be enough information to write the information below as a card. Because if you've ever seen Pantone cards, they usually look somewhat like this. So I'm going to kind of mimic that style, just because it's very clean, organized, and I do like how it looks. Even though the blue kind of washes away, it's going to be fine, actually. Just to make sure I don't do any changes in the future, Command-C, Command-F, and drag it across. Command-C, Command-F, and drag it across. Command-C, Command-F, drag it across. And you can guess what I'm going to say next, and drag it across. So we have our little Pantone swatches ready to go. So now, because we're actually going to be doing gradients as well, I'm going to drag out that as well. So we're just not going to worry about that in the future. It's going to be the size of 2 cards, slightly more rectangular, just to kind of resemble the slider. And we're just going to sample. And it does the rest for us, which is awesome. And we're going to drag it in again. We're going to sample the back color this time. And it does the rest for us. Perfect. So we got those 2 gradients as well. And we're going to throw in these little background swatches again. Command-C, Command-F. And we are good. So we already created a very organized, clean kind of presentation for the colors. And any designer can just go through, grab the swatch he needs, and he's in business. And you've even saved the client so many emails because he doesn't even have to email you in the future. And you also don't want to see your logo 2 years in the future using the wrong type of orange. Well, if you're a designer like me, I kind of want to have control over what I designed. And I do have the utmost control because I can kind of set the standards again. So a gray in this case doesn't look too great, I'm not going to lie. So I'm going to choose a darker blue in this case. A very fleshed out tone blue. Yeah, that's perfect. So now we need to grab the information for all of these cards. And if we go to File, Document, Color Mode, we're in RGB. So we're not being restricted, which is a good thing for now. But we actually have to grab all this information. So we're actually going to just create the very basic layout first. So we're just going to do sky blue, for example. And that's going to just call the color in this case. Because if we want to reference it, we don't want to say RGB 245689. This way we can just say sky blue, and whoever we're talking to knows that we're talking about that specific color without referencing all those numbers. So sky blue, but again, we're on the wrong font, so Mont. So usually the very first thing that I like to do is write the Pantone color. So we're going to have sky blue, Pantone. Then we're going to follow it up with the process color, which is just the CMYK. It's a fancier way of saying it per se. And we're going to write it off with RGB. In this case, I don't really find hex codes too useful. Kind of just like writing the RGB values. Again, it's your call, but I'm just going to do it my way for now. Which isn't exactly the set in stone way. Sky blue, Pantone, process, RGB. I think I'm just going to do the semi-bold version of that. And then everything afterwards doesn't have to be in that. So I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, Command-C, Command-F, drag them over here. And now we're just going to convert them to Pantone. So we're going to do Object, or in this case actually Edit, Recolor Artwork. We're going to do the color books, and we're going to do the CMYK uncoded in this case. We're going to see slight changes, but that's going to be the closest color that we have. And I'm going to click OK. We can go over here, get our little color palette open. We're going to have to show more options. And we know that this is Pantone 106-1U. Sadly, we cannot paste it. Pantone 106-1U. And we're going to write that in. 106-1U. Alright. Now we need the CMYK. So I'm going to click on this. And we need the CMYK. So in this case, we're going to do 7.2, comma. I'm going to sample the color again. 1.97, 1.9. In this case, we're just going to write 2. We're just going to round up actually, just to make it easier on ourselves, and we'll convert the values afterwards. It's going to be M. Then we need the Y, which is 3. 3, Y, and 0, K. We also don't need this to be bolded, so we're just going to remove that boldness. And then for the RGB, it's pretty much the exact same process. So for the RGB, 233, 240, 233, 240, and the very last one, 242, comma, 242. Select all, regular, and we're going to do RGB. And you're pretty much just going to have to do that for the rest of the colors. So give it an arbitrary name and just write down the information about it. And even for the gradients, just do the exact same thing. Or, because it's going to be using the exact same colors as above, you can just reference it as sky blue to, dark rim orange, or however you want to call it. Doesn't really matter. But that's pretty much it, because we introduced the idea of color here, and we're going to solidify that idea over here. And we're done. So now let's move on to the next part, which is going to be logo usage. And that's a bit more different than using the color schemes, because we define the color schemes, but now we need to define how this logo is going to look on the color schemes. And you can see how we're kind of approaching this very linearly. So with logo usage, we're trying to explain to the client how to use our logo. And not in the way that you should copy and paste it. You should use our logo, not someone else's. You should use their colors, and you shouldn't make the mountains taller or smaller. But that the logo should be put and almost used in a very specific way. And here's what I mean by this. If you have a logo, then you don't want it to appear as the same color as this, for example. Because otherwise, you won't actually see the ident. You'll just see the white parts of the mountains and the sun, right? That shouldn't be something the client ever does. You also wanted it to appear on a gradient background, or a background with full of roses, right? Or maybe a background that has a very neon green luminescent gradient, right? Because the client might think it's appropriate because we kind of put it here, that, oh, it works on color, it's going to work on anywhere. But it's not. And we have to define where this logo can be used, how it's going to be used, and what we can do with this logo. And again, there's multiple ways you can do this. I've seen style guides just create an example of what not to do and then cross it out. You can also have a very large chunk of text, for example, just describing what you can and can't do. But in this case, I'm not a very big fan of doing massive chunks of text. Of course, maybe it'll be alright if you kind of break it up into chapters even more. But in this case, I just want to show a visual representation of what not to do and to do, and maybe add descriptions underneath. So make it understandable, but not go too in depth where we're specifying each singular color that we can't touch or use. So we're going to use the checkmark system. We're going to use the checkmark system and the cross symbol. So X's and checkmarks. So again, we're going to start it off as we start any style sheet. That's creating a bunch of squares. So 1. Actually, in this case, I should have actually just been using the blend tool, just because I could be dragging this in and out. I'm actually just going to try this really quickly, because this could save us a lot of time in the future. So object blend options. We're going to do specified steps 2. An object blend. And hey, it works. What a great system. So we're gonna push this out a bit more, a bit less, and it all works dynamically. God love Illustrator. So once more in, once more in, and we can have the check mark right here. And then 1, 2, drag this down. These would be our 2 palettes in this case, and we're just gonna expand them. And we're ready to go in business. So we're gonna start off with things we don't want the client to do. So we don't want the client to use the same colored background as the logo itself. And we're gonna group this while we're here. We also don't want the client using the logo on a color that isn't one of the specified colors. So we're gonna select the specified color and we're just gonna kind of exaggerate. So it's gonna be a very dark orange, or in this case, not too great of a fan of it. So we're just gonna choose a red and saturate it up. So you see that it's not in the color scheme, so it's a pretty visible difference that it's not in there, and we're using a color that's not specified, and that should be a no-no. This color can also be not used on a gradient background, and we don't want this color to be used on anything that resembles a pattern. So I'm just gonna select let's select a orange again. And let's kind of just drag in a few patterns here. So I'm gonna do 1. That's gonna be our makeshift pattern for the day. I'm gonna do object blend again since it seemed to really work last time, so hoping it continues its streak. Object blend, object make, there we go. Object expand. I think I'm just gonna select the color again and just dim it just a slightly less. Yeah, so it's a striped background. So we see the 4 variations where we don't want the logo to be used. And now we kind of want to make a contrasting version of that. So we're going to make a version where the logo can be used, which is just a regular version of the color, the sky blue that we had before. We're going to have a version of the yellow, because again, it is in one of the defined palettes. I'm actually going to select this orange to be more exact. We're going to select a different color in this case for the yellow, or even the black. And here we're going to do the exact same thing, just by selecting a orange again. And I'm going to switch these up. So the logo is going to work on a plain background, a specified color, a different specified color, but we're actually going to invert the mark. And the mark is also going to work on a very dark tone color, also going to be inverted. And now all we have to do is drag and drop. So we have the first tone. We actually have to create one more of these, because I think I removed it in the previous version. So we're going to copy, paste it in. And we're going to drag this in. So now, if we drag this copy in and this copy in, let's make sure that they're the same size, which they should be. And we're going to shrink it down. Admittedly, if you want to save time doing this, I'll just create all this in the beginning. Not like I am, going back halfway and adding another symbol. That looks great. Even though it is, yeah, no, it's the same size. So we just have to create the actual checkbox. So I'm going to create another box because that's all I'm good at. I'm gonna shrink it down. Kind of popped over here. And we just have to create a check mark. And we can just grab a check mark from online and just do the trace option. But in this case, I have very slight confidence that I could actually make a check mark. So I'm gonna rotate this. All right. And do the exact same thing just for the X. We're good. So, very basic style guide, again, but for the logo usage, it's going to make a lot more sense. And we can add a few paragraphs here if we want. In this case, I'm just going to do the exact same thing and just give it some more room and add a description underneath. And we're done. So this looks pretty good. Just going to drop it in the center. It locks and we're done. So the next thing we're going to do is introduce the typeface section. So for the typeface section, it's going to start almost the exact same way as we did any other section. We first have to introduce it. So we had the ski world introduced before, but we don't know what font it is and we don't know how it's going to be used. So we're going to divide it into two sections, typeface and typeface usage. For the typeface, the best way to introduce it is just to give the actual names of the font and just, a little quick demo of how the font looks like. And then for the typeface usage, we can specify where it's going to be used, how it's going to be used, and when it's going to be used. Because you can actually define specific situations where you want to use the bold scenario, or you want to say that all headline fonts are 50 pixels, right? You can all define that. So the very cliche way that I found to define the fonts is to do almost like a very generic thing, the way that Apple allows you to preview a font. So we're just going to do an AA. And we're going to do a just quick description. So Montserrat, I believe. Nope. Montserrat semi normal, I believe. I hope so. So I'm just going to make this slightly larger. Make sure it aligns. So we're going to see that Ski World is going to use a Montserrat regular and a Montserrat bold. And in this case, this actual part uses extra bold. So we're going to use those two specific items. So Montserrat normal. Command C, Command F. And we're going to show that Montserrat is going to say the actual tagline of Ski World, where every day is a snow day. And we're going to make it a bit smaller, just to show the visual difference. Command C, Command F. We're going to type out the entire alphabet. Where we're going to specify the actual kerning of it. So character 0, the kerning for Montserrat for this font is 0. And we're going to throw that in as well. Select them all and align them. And we should have done that in the very first case. I'm just going to make sure that they're all aligned to the left. And then with the align panel, we're going to throw them all to the left and drag it in. And in this case, this entire font set uses Montserrat. And we're good to go to introduce the next typeset. And that is the same thing, but Montserrat extra bold. And we're gonna have to do the exact same thing, just make sure that everything is extra bold. It's gonna be a jarring difference, but you'd actually be able to see this jarring difference. So where every day is a snow day, extra bold. Or even in this case, yeah, Montserrat extra bold, Montserrat extra bold, Montserrat extra bold. So we see a visual difference between typeface 1 and typeface 2. Well, they're the same typeface, well, different font sets and weight, because we can see how the letters are going to look, and we can see how they distinguish from each other. And it's a very basic introduction to it, just because whoever's reading this can actually just visually see the difference, and that's the most important part. So that is just going to be grouped. So the next thing is actually going to be the typeface usage, and we have to think about how this typeface is going to be used. And again, it depends on your brand. If you're creating a website with this font, it would be very smart to actually define the size of it on different browsers, for example. So all headlines are going to use Montserrat extra bold. If, let's say, we're going to be using any buzzwords, for example, we want those to be bolded and everything else to be just in the normal way. So make sure you define that, because it's actually going to play around with the logo very well. In this case, we're going to actually be determining the headlines for it. So we're going to be using Ski World. So Command C, Command V, and we're going to be dissecting Ski World for the client. So Ski World. The first part uses extra bold, the other part uses normal. So we're going to define that. So we're going to draw out our little lines again. I think we're just going to sample them from the previous guide that we created. It seemed to work pretty well. Even though it is kind of thin now that I'm looking back at it. But it should be fine. We're just going to roll with it. And you know what? I don't think anyone will mind. We're just going to bump this up to 2. Just so it's a bit more visible. And then in this case, we're going to select these 2 headlines. Command C, Command V. And we're going to throw this into here. And we're going to scale it until it fits. And that's going to be our font for the other one. So it's going to be 20, not 200. That would have been a bit too large for my taste. So then we have 200 here. Oh, my bad. We have 20 over here, and we're going to have 20 over here. Perfect. I'm just going to scale these 2 again. Bring it all the way to the right hand side. And we're good to go. So again, we're already visually showing which case of the words uses what. But in this case, for the client, there's actually a way I want to brand this actual whole company. And that's again, where the cool thing with style guides come in, we can experiment it. Because Ski World is such a dominant part of this typeface and this actual word usage for the typography, I want to actually carry that throughout the entire brand. And how I'm going to do this is actually define the headlines, if there's ever going to be an event, or how we're going to show the name or the actual people working there, how we're going to bold their name, if we are going to bold their name. And I'm going to use this exact same ideology just to show the kind of difference. So I'm going to start off with creating a same list as we did right here. And it shouldn't be actually Gotham. That's a big part of my mistake. We should actually make that just Montserrat. And we're going to go over here. And just define the 4 different scenarios in this case that I see the most vital for the brand. So I'm going to have name and title, locations, slogan, and other. As we did before, we're going to actually make this a bit smaller. And we're going to really separate these out. give it some nice breathing room to work with. And on the other hand side, we're going to align them to the other way. And we're going to type in the names and titles, but we're going to make it much larger. So for the name and title, how do we want that to look? So for Ski World, if we have something like accounting, if we have accounting manager, I want the actual accounting part to be bolded. It's going to give it some weight. For locations, I want the location to be bolded, so Yellow Point Peak Resort, let's say. I want the Yellow Point Peak to be bolded. For the slogan, our slogan is again, where every day is a snow day. Where every day is a snow day. That's going to be bolded. And we're going to carry that out through all the other things. And for the other, we can just write something miscellaneous that does need to be bolded, such as a ski competition. So annual ski competition for Ski World. And that's going to stay as it is. Those are going to be our 4 scenarios. I'm going to bring this in. We're going to align this. We're going to group everything, bring it up, and there we go. That's our second part that we just created. And again, shows Ski World, shows the name and title, how this bolding is going to work. And if you're using headlines, use headlines. If you're going to have a lot of paragraphs on your website, you're going to want to define how those paragraphs are going to look as well, with different kerning settings, leading settings, and again, boldness and weight. It's very important to define this because for the client, it's going to save him a lot of time and you're bringing him a lot of value. So now let's jump into the actual way that we're going to be doing merchandising. So after covering the actual type and the color and the logo usage, we can start throwing in more elements that are going to be very unique towards your client. And for my scenario, this is going to be for Ski World. And for Ski World, we're going to have hats and we're going to have t-shirts. That's going to be very mandatory. So we're going to lay them out, how it's going to look, and what color t-shirts they're going to have, and what type of logo to use for that certain type of t-shirt. So let's just start from the basics. So you already have this if you downloaded it, but I found a couple of just vector mockups. So all we're going to do is we're going to do the exact same thing that we did with the symbols palette before. So we're just going to take them in, and we're going to drag them in. So we're going to have the front side and back side, and we're going to have the front side and back side. And it doesn't matter if you choose movie clip or graphic, it really doesn't play a role in the actual creation of a mockup. So we're just going to drag all of this in here. And then we're going to do save symbols. We're going to save to desktop or applications as the t-shirts. So we're going to go to Ski World and we're going to go to other libraries, desktop, t-shirts, and here they are. So we're just going to drag all of them in. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, and we got the hats. Very, very important hats. So I'm just going to line them quickly up. And in this example, we're going to say that we're only going to have one gigantic hat. Hats usually don't come in such large sizes, so I'm just going to create 2 copies of it. So this is going to look fine. And then we're going to copy this over, create a copy, and paste that copy in. But this way it's not going to be a symbol, and we can actually change the color of it. So perfect. So we're going to select these 3. We're going to make sure they are aligned. Going to select these 3, make sure they are aligned. But we have to make sure that this element is grouped first. So are they aligned? Yes. Are they vertically aligned? Yes. Are they horizontally aligned? Yes. And I'm just going to drag that to the center. So Ski World, I'm thinking that they're never going to have very bright yellow t-shirts just because I don't think they would last very long in the type of, the type of work that they do in the snow. I think they just wouldn't last very long and they start to lose color. And it'd also be very expensive for them to print perhaps. So we're just going to keep them in white and black, and we're just going to use some logo variations to do some distinguishing results between them. For the white t-shirts, I'm going to use the very original logo, and I'm going to put it on Ski World. So it's not going to be in the center. We're going to define that we want it to act as a crest in the very corner. Like a Ski World crest that you work there. Or that perhaps you sometimes won an annual ski competition. That's going to be the client's job, and you won't have to worry about that part. Unless, of course, you got hired to run the Ski World competition, but for that, I'd have to create an entirely different course. So Ski World, I'm going to shrink that down, and we're going to put it on the back of the t-shirt. Perfect. And then we're going to do the exact same thing for the hat. So Command C, Command F. We're going to put it to the center, increase it, and drag it up. So that's going to be our hat design. Perfect. So now this logo won't look at all great on this t-shirt. So we're going to use a completely different logo to define that. But again, just because they are different sizes, I'm going to make sure that both of these logos are the same size. It's pretty important to define that this logo isn't going to be fluctuating in size. Gonna open this up and make sure that this is going to be a white logo. Actually, I hope I didn't change all the rest of the logos to reflect that change, which I didn't, and we're fine. We're going to continue on. So we have that covered. Command C, Command F. Bring it all the way over here. And then in this case, we need to create the actual black version of the hat if we want to create the white on black. But in this case, I think yellow hats would actually look very cool for the client. So we're going to try to quickly experiment how yellow hats would even look. And again, quick mock-ups. We're not losing any time here. And that looks fantabulous. So I think we're going to keep the white hats. But we will need some kind of gray outline. So I'm just going to throw in a 50% gray. And call that a day. Just so we actually see the little marks that go around. So I'm going to grab the logo again. Drag it over. Make sure it's the same size as the logo up top. Increase in size. Contrast and compare. Increase in size. Scoot it over. And we're good. And we're going to drag this down. And there we go. But again, in this case, I'm not too big of a fan of it. The white doesn't look too great. So we're going to go back. We're going to delete this version. Paste in the black version. We're going to have to do the exact same comparison as before. And again, I didn't do the thing I promised to do last time, but we should have just dragged in all the symbols, resized them at once, and then just used them at will. But we didn't really do that, so we kind of have to suffer for our mistakes, or at least I have to. Set it as the same scale, and drag it out. And perfect. Black logos on yellow hats is going to look fantabulous. So that's done. So now for the stationary designs, let's just go on forever, just because there's a lot of grids that you can use. So I'm just going to do just a very simple business card to show you just the process behind it, and that you should just usually mark off the business card how it's supposed to look dimension wise with grids, just to show the actual margin, so 2 inches away from the border or 4 inches away from the border. And it also depends on the client you're designing for, because I know in America and Canada they have different business card standard sizes, which is kind of odd for me, but you have to design it for the client who's going to be using it, so keep that in mind as well. But in this case, just from reference, our business card is going to be 3.78 inches wide, 3.78 inches wide, and for the height, 2.164, 2.164. And okay, so that's our business card, just a very regular demo. And that's the actual size of a business card, just on Illustrator. It looks kind of small. So we're just going to sample a yellow color. We're going to imagine that we're creating the backside of a logo, or the backside of a business card. We're going to grab our logo from before, the black version, we're gonna slap it on top. And that's great. So for business cards, we actually don't want to do any type of lorem ipsum. I think that's very bad practice because you're not showing the client the actual layout the business card should have. Because if you do lorem ipsum, again, that's just like filler text, and he won't know where to put the address, for example, or where to put his name. And in this case, we can again define this very clearly. So we want to have the information up top. So I'm just gonna try to grab, if we didn't do this before, we did not do this before. So I'm gonna have to lay out the business card. So I'm gonna draw out a little box for the type, and we're gonna start. So accounting department, and we're gonna have to make that much smaller. Align it to the left. And now we actually have to refer on how we want this to look. So if it's accounting manager, accounting has to be bolded and everything else doesn't have to be. So department is going to be just regular. Then after that, we want to say the name of the gentleman using the business card. So John Doe, CFO, seems pretty appropriate. And we want to bring it all the way to auto. And kerning is going to be to 0, and we already set that up. The next part could be perhaps the address, or we could do the phone number. So let's just do phone number. So +1 905 313 8806. Telephone. If that makes sense. Perhaps we should reverse it. So T, then the phone number, and give it space, a bit more simple. And then let's also do his email. So John Doe at skiworld.ca. Perfect. And we're going to do the exact same thing from the bottom. So we want to do the address this time. So Yellow Point Road. I even forgot the address I used the first time around. So Yellow Point Peak Resort. Yellow Point Peak Resort. And again, this doesn't have to be bolded. And then the rest just can go with Ontario, Canada, L4, 5, 6, 7, R. Just some arbitrary numbers. And we're going to bring this all the way down. So with this business card, we already designed it, but we just need to set some restrictions for it. So we have to assume that this logo is going to be in the center. And off the bat, we're just going to define the actual margins. So I'm going to draw out a rectangle, hit it to the top. And then if we hit the rectangle, we can actually see the height of it. So 0.475. So I'm going to round it up to 0.5. I'm going to make a duplicate copy, drag it down. Now I'm going to make sure that this logo fits right in between very snugly. So that's done, and that's done. And I pretty much just did that for the numbers just to be a bit more easier to work with. So we can remove that. And actually, while we're here, we're going to make sure that it's a 0.5 edge on the other side as well. And because we're so lucky, it already is. So now we're just going to define those points pretty much. And as we did before, we're going to drag out our little grid. And we're going to sample from the ski world. So that's going to be our 1, or our 0.5 inch. And then this is also going to be 0.5 inches. And we just defined this pretty nicely. And then we also want to define the space between here and here. So that way if anyone uses it, they know how to use it. So we draw out a square. We make sure that the square fits pretty snugly, so that in any program they can match this up. And the square is 0.142. Let's do 0.15. Let's make sure that this fits snugly in between it again. We're going to drag the square down and make sure that this matches as well. So we have a lot of wasted space here per se. So I'm just gonna kill that off. Perfecto. So the spacer is the exact same. So again, we can grab our nifty little margin tool. We're gonna flip it over. And we're gonna make sure that we can really indicate that this is however much that I just said it was and already forgot the number of, which is 0.15, right? 0.15. Correct. We're going to do the exact same thing on the other side. So, as much as these grids are very nice to work with, they're pretty much useless if you don't have a number attached to them. So, off the bat, we're going to throw that in as well. So we're going to call this 0.125 or 0.15. We're going to make this smaller. It's going to be the exact same color as this. And we also have to do the measurements. Just because without measurements, again, it's pretty much useless for us to work with. Unless, of course, you define them in the very beginning. That you're always going to be using inches, but for good practice, it's easier to reiterate. And I'm going to bring that number all the way here. Do 1.0 inches. Command F. 1.0 inches. And then we're also going to define the entire length of the business card, because I think that's also very important to set, just because so that anyone who looks at this business card can automatically tell, the actual dimensions of it. So I'm just going to write another paragraph here. And the business card, as we know, is 3.78 by 2.164. And we're pretty much done. We define the business card and it looks very easy to work with. The information is there and the client will know how to use it. We can also define the size of the logo, but I think that's a bit unnecessary since we defined the margins of it, but everything else should be fine. And that's pretty much how a stationary guide would work. If you have ski passes, if you have the front side of the business card, you're going to make the mock-up of it, create it, and then set the dimensions. But if you have something like a letterhead that might not fit on this entire artboard, all you have to do is create it in another document, create all the guides there, then you can just scale it down in Illustrator and fit it snugly right next to the business cards. But when you're working with it in Illustrator in another document, then all your dimensions are accurate, right? Because you'll be using 1 inch as it'll be printed on 1 inch. And you won't have to scale it down beforehand before writing down all those dimensions. So then for the social media actual artboard as well, for the presence. So for the social media preference, it again depends how you want to stylize it. In my case, I just wanted to do a Twitter and a actual Twitter header. So again, we see the logo would work on white. It's going to use this icon. Where every day is a snow day, it's going to be clearly visible. It's going to use this banner always. We're not going to use images. That's pretty much what this portion is saying. We're not going to use any images or photos for the header. It's just going to have our slogan on our color. And for the tweets, it's also going to look like this. It's going to be very personal and it's going to use our hashtag. I would of course write this somewhere in a column beside it, like an explanation. But the way we started off the guide, we didn't really make room for it. So if you do want to consider writing that text in, consider adding in some more space to write a small brief paragraph on how this reflects in your actual style guide. And that's pretty much all you need to know when creating a style guide. There are pretty simple steps on just explaining to whoever is going to be looking at this brand how to properly use it. And even though some of this might not be seen to the client at first because he might reject the idea or he might want some tweaks, it's a really good way to actually trial and test your logo. Because through this process, we saw our logo, how it looks on white, on different colors, what kind of colors we're going to be using in the brand. That way we can figure that entirely out before we go into Photoshop and start making those dynamic templates. Because we might go into Photoshop later and, might want to make a mock-up of a hat. But if we don't know the actual colors of the hat that we should use, that's going to properly match the logo, it's going to cause a bit of confusion. But this way, we have everything figured out. We know how much space we need. We know how we're going to present it. What type of logo types to use in different scenarios. We have We have all the type laid out. That's all done. The stationary designs are all done, so you can just literally copy and paste them into Photoshop to create those stationary designs. And even the social media is done. So if we're going to be doing any iPad mockups or mockups involving a computer, we already have stationary designs and even the actual social media designs to complement it. So we're pretty much ready to take this and distill it down to a client presentation and then distill it to a personal presentation. But we have all these assets just ready to go, especially these being in symbols already. It's going to be incredibly easy to move into the next step and just even save all these assets to the client. And again, we're providing so much value to him just because we're creating so many rules and so many more explanations on how to use the logo. Because the logo itself, just this, might not work well with his brand unless we properly define it and explain to him how to use it so properly that he's never going to have consistencies in the future. So I hope you enjoyed the lesson, and I'll see you in the very next lesson.